I needed help after my stroke. My daughter-in-law laughed, "We're not your nurses." She hid my medication and told my son, "He's faking it to get attention." I couldn't feel my left hand anymore. That was the first thing I noticed when I woke up that Tuesday morning, sunlight streaming through the curtains of what used to be my home, but now felt like a prison. The stroke had happened 3 months ago, sudden and vicious, stealing my independence in a single afternoon while I was reading the newspaper in my favorite chair. One moment I was solving the crossword puzzle, the next I was on the floor, my mouth refusing to form words, my body betraying me in ways I never imagined possible. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive, that many people my age don't survive what I went through, but lying in this guest bedroom in my son's house, dependent on people who clearly resented my existence, I wasn't so sure luck had anything to do with it. "Please," I managed to say, my voice coming out thick and slurred like I'd had too much to drink, though I hadn't touched alcohol since the stroke. "My pills, I need my pills." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, my right hand doing all the work while my left hung useless at my side. The morning medication was crucial. The doctors had been very clear about that. Miss a dose and the risk of another stroke increased dramatically. But the pill organizer that I'd left on the counter last night, carefully prepared with Harold's help, was gone. Vanessa sat at the kitchen table, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone screen, not even bothering to look up. Her hair was pulled back in one of those complicated braids that probably took an hour to create, her makeup flawless even though it was barely 7 in the morning. She'd always been beautiful in that sharp, calculated way that made people think twice before crossing her. When Daniel first brought her home 8 years ago, I'd been impressed by her polish, her confidence. Now I recognized it for what it was, a carefully constructed facade, hiding something cold and cruel underneath. "We are not your nurses, Leonard," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. She didn't even pause her scrolling. The words hit me harder than the physical pain radiating through my weak limbs. "I just need to know where the pills are," I said, forcing each word out carefully. The speech therapy had helped, but stress made everything worse, made my tongue feel thick and uncooperative. "Maybe if you weren't so dramatic all the time, people would want to help you more." She finally looked up, her eyes cold and assessing. "But you're always putting on a show, aren't you? Poor Leonard can't do anything for himself. Poor Leonard needs everyone to drop everything and cater to him." Had a stroke. My voice shook and I hated myself for it, hated the weakness that had invaded every aspect of my life. Before this happened, I'd been Leonard Hale, civil engineer, the man who designed bridges that would stand for generations, who prided himself on never asking anyone for anything. I'd raised Daniel alone after his mother died, worked 2 jobs to put him through college, never once complained or asked for help. And now I couldn't even find my own medication without begging. "Oh, I know all about your stroke," Vanessa said, standing up and walking past me to pour herself another cup of coffee. She moved with deliberate slowness, making sure I saw how easy it was for her, how simple ordinary movements were when your body actually worked. "You remind us every single day, but you know what I think? I think you're milking it. I think you could do a lot more for yourself if you actually tried instead of expecting everyone to wait on you hand and foot." "Where are the pills?" I asked again, my frustration building. I could feel my blood pressure rising, could feel the familiar tightness in my chest that the doctors had warned me about. Stress was dangerous for someone in my condition. "Stay calm," they'd said. "Avoid confrontation." But how was I supposed to stay calm when my own daughter-in-law was actively sabotaging my recovery? "I have no idea," she said with a shrug that was so casual it had to be deliberate. "Maybe you misplaced them. You're always forgetting things, aren't you? Just yesterday you couldn't remember where you put your reading glasses." That had been true and the memory of it burned. The stroke had affected my short-term memory, made me foggy and confused sometimes. But I knew I hadn't misplaced the pills. I'd organized them myself last night, had double-checked everything before bed because I knew how important they were. "Vanessa, please," I said, and I hated the begging tone in my voice, hated that I'd been reduced to this. "The doctor said missing doses is dangerous. I could have another stroke." "Well then, maybe you should have been more careful about where you put them." She picked up her phone again, dismissing me. "Daniel will be home in a few hours. You can ask him then." A few hours, the medication needed to be taken with breakfast, within the same 2-hour window every day to maintain proper levels in my bloodstream. Waiting a few hours could mean the difference between recovery and another catastrophic event. But Vanessa knew that. She'd been at the hospital appointments, had heard the same warnings I had. She just didn't care. I wanted to scream at her, wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her until she understood what she was doing to me. But I couldn't. My balance was too unstable, my left side too weak. Any sudden movement and I'd end up on the floor again, helpless and humiliated while she stepped over me like I was nothing. So instead, I turned slowly, carefully, using the counter for support, and made my way back toward the guest bedroom. Each step was a calculated effort, my right leg doing most of the work while my left dragged slightly, a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. "Oh, and Leonard," Vanessa called after me, her voice sweet as poison. "When Daniel gets home, I'm going to tell him how you screamed at me this morning, how you've been getting aggressive and unreasonable. He's already worried about your mental state, you know. Thinks the stroke might have affected your brain more than the doctors realize." I stopped, my hand gripping the doorframe. "I didn't scream at you," I said quietly. "Didn't you?" She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made my stomach turn. "That's not how I'll remember it. And who do you think Daniel is going to believe? His wife of 8 years, or his father who can't even remember where he put his glasses yesterday?" That was when I saw him, Harold Finch, my neighbor and one of my oldest friends, standing just outside the kitchen window. He must have come to the back door like he usually did, must have been about to knock when he heard voices and paused. And in his hand, held up to the window glass, was his phone, recording everything. Our eyes met for just a second, and Harold put a finger to his lips. Then he stepped back, out of Vanessa's line of sight, and disappeared around the corner of the house. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking for reasons that had nothing to do with the stroke. Harold had seen everything, had recorded Vanessa's cruelty. Part of me felt a surge of hope, of vindication. But another part, the part of me that had always been too proud for my own good, felt ashamed that my friend had witnessed my humiliation. I made it back to the guest bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, my breathing labored from the short walk. The room that used to be Daniel's childhood bedroom, full of soccer trophies and posters of bands he'd loved as a teenager, had been stripped clean and turned into what Vanessa called the guest suite. Neutral beige walls, generic artwork from department stores, nothing personal or warm. It felt like a hotel room, temporary and unwelcoming, which I supposed was the point. 20 minutes later, there was a soft knock on the window. I pulled back the curtain to see Harold standing outside, his weathered face creased with concern. I opened the window, grateful that at least this room faced the backyard where Vanessa wouldn't see. "I got it all," Harold said quietly. He was 73 years older than me, but the stroke made me feel ancient in comparison. He still moved with easy grace, still had the sharp eyes and quick mind of the investigative journalist he'd been for 40 years before retirement. The whole conversation, video and audio. "Harold, I don't know what to say," my throat felt tight. "Don't say anything yet, just trust me, okay?" He reached through the window and squeezed my shoulder. "I've been documenting this for a while now. Since I started noticing the bruises on your arms, the way you flinched when she came into a room. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. You've been recording her, something about that made me uncomfortable, even though I was grateful. It felt sneaky, underhanded, not the way I usually did things. I'd always been direct, confrontational when necessary, the kind of man who believed in facing problems head-on. But the stroke had stolen that option from me, had made me vulnerable in ways I never imagined. "I've been documenting elder abuse," Harold corrected gently. "There's a difference. Leonard, what she's doing to you, it's not just cruel, it's illegal, and I've got proof now. Multiple instances over the past 6 weeks. 6 weeks, had it really been that long? The days had started blurring together, each one a repetitive cycle of humiliation and helplessness. I'd lost track of time, lost track of just how bad things had gotten. "What do we do with it?" I asked. "We wait," Harold said. "We keep gathering evidence. And when the time is right, when we have enough that Daniel can't possibly deny what's happening, we show him everything. But Leonard, I need you to be patient. Can you do that?" Patience had never been one of my strengths. Even before the stroke, I'd been the kind of man who wanted problems solved immediately, who got frustrated with delays and complications. The stroke had made it worse, had shortened my temper and made me irritable in ways I didn't like. But looking at Harold's steady, calm expression, I nodded. "I'll try." "That's all I ask. Now about those pills, do you know where she actually put them?" "No idea." The helplessness washed over me again. "I'll find them," Harold said. "I'm going to knock on the front door, tell Vanessa I need to borrow some sugar or some nonsense like that. While she's distracted, I'll look around. Just hang tight." He disappeared and I sat on the bed, my mind racing. This was really happening. My daughter-in-law was actively trying to harm me, and my oldest friend was conducting a covert operation in my son's house to protect me. It felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than my actual life. But the ache in my left side, the slur in my speech, the fear of missing my medication, that was all too real. True to his word, I heard the doorbell ring a few minutes later, heard Vanessa's artificially sweet voice greeting Harold. I couldn't make out the words, but I could imagine her performance, the concerned daughter-in-law playing her role perfectly. The conversation seemed to go on forever, and I found myself getting anxious, my fingers drumming against my thigh in an irregular pattern that I couldn't control. Another symptom of the stroke, involuntary movements that emerged when I was stressed. Finally, Harold appeared at my window again, holding my pill organizer. Found them in the cabinet under the sink, behind the cleaning supplies. Took me 10 minutes of searching while she was showing me her new coffee maker. Relief flooded through me so intensely I felt dizzy. "Thank you," I said, taking the organizer with shaking hands. "Thank you so much." "Take your meds," Harold said firmly. "And Leonard, this is just the beginning. We're going to make this right, I promise you that." After he left, I sat there with the pills in my hand, staring at the small tablets that meant the difference between recovery and catastrophe. Vanessa had hidden them behind cleaning supplies, in a cabinet I could barely reach even on my good days. She'd known exactly what she was doing, had calculated how much harm she could cause while maintaining plausible deniability. If Harold hadn't found them, if I'd waited for Daniel to come home, hours would have passed. Dangerous hours. My hands were shaking as I swallowed the pills, and it wasn't just from the stroke. It was rage, pure and simple, burning through my chest like acid. I'd spent my whole life being reasonable, being measured, taking the high road. But lying there in that impersonal guest room, dependent on the mercy of someone who had none, something shifted inside me. I wanted revenge. I wanted Vanessa to feel a fraction of the humiliation and fear she'd inflicted on me. And for the first time since the stroke, I felt something other than helplessness. I felt purpose. The days that followed established a pattern. Harold would visit regularly, always with some innocent excuse. Borrowing tools, dropping off baked goods from his niece, asking about the old engineering plans I'd stored in Daniel's garage. And each visit he'd quietly record another piece of evidence. Vanessa mocking my attempts to walk without the cane. Vanessa forgetting to tell me about doctor's appointments. Vanessa slamming doors when I called for help, pretending she couldn't hear me. But I was gathering evidence too, in my own way. I started keeping a notebook, documenting everything with the methodical precision that had made me good at my job. Times, dates, exact quotes when I could remember them. The neurologist had suggested keeping a journal anyway, to help with memory and cognitive function. Now it served a dual purpose. Daniel remained oblivious, and that hurt almost as much as Vanessa's cruelty. My son, who I'd raised alone from age 8, who I'd sacrificed everything for, couldn't see what was happening right in front of him. Or maybe he could and just didn't want to acknowledge it. That possibility was even worse. "Dad seems to be getting more confused," Vanessa said one evening at dinner. Daniel had actually been home early for once, a rarity given his demanding job at the tech company. I was sitting at the table, concentrating hard on cutting my chicken with one hand, trying to maintain some dignity. Yesterday he accused me of hiding his medication. Can you imagine? Daniel looked at me with concern. "Dad, did you say that?" "I couldn't find my pills," I said carefully, measuring each word. My speech was better than it had been right after the stroke, but stress still made it worse, made me sound drunk or slow. They weren't where I left them. "See what I mean?" Vanessa said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "The doctors warned us about this, honey. Memory issues, confusion, possibly even paranoia. It's all part of the brain damage from the stroke." "I don't have brain damage," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I know what happened. You hid them." "Leonard," Daniel said, and the doubt in his voice cut deeper than any of Vanessa's barbs. "Why would Vanessa hide your medication? That doesn't make any sense." "I don't know why," I said, frustration making my words come out harsh and loud. "But she did." Vanessa's eyes went wide, filling with tears that appeared so quickly they had to be manufactured. "I've been trying so hard to help him, Daniel. I've rearranged my entire schedule, given up my yoga classes, my book club, everything, just to be here for your father. And this is how he treats me, accusing me of trying to hurt him." "Dad, that's not fair," Daniel said quietly. "Vanessa's been incredible through all of this." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table over, to shake my son until he opened his eyes and saw the truth. But I couldn't. My left hand was still too weak to grip properly, my balance too unstable to risk sudden movements. And my temper, which had always been quick, was even worse after the stroke. The neurologist had warned me about that too, about emotional volatility being a common side effect. I had to be careful, had to stay calm, or risk Daniel dismissing everything I said as stroke-induced irrationality. So instead, I stood up slowly, using the table for support. "I'm going to my room," I said quietly. "See," I heard Vanessa whisper to Daniel as I walked away. "He's getting aggressive. The doctors said to watch for personality changes." That night, lying in the dark, I obsessed over every word, every look, every moment of that dinner. My mind wouldn't stop replaying it, wouldn't let me rest. This was my flaw, I knew. I'd always been someone who held grudges, who couldn't let things go. My wife used to joke that I could remember slights from 20 years ago with perfect clarity. The stroke hadn't changed that. If anything, it had made it worse, had given my mind fewer other things to focus on, so it just circled endlessly around my anger and humiliation. Harold found me the next morning sitting in the backyard, staring at nothing. He'd let himself through the side gate, the way he always did now. "You look terrible," he said, sitting down in the lawn chair next to mine. Couldn't sleep, my voice was rough from exhaustion. Kept thinking about all the things I should have said at dinner, all the ways I could have made Daniel listen. "Leonard, you need to let me handle this," Harold said gently. "I know it's hard. I know you want to confront her directly, but if you lose your temper, if you give her any ammunition to use against you, this whole thing falls apart. She's already trying to paint you as confused and aggressive. Don't prove her right." "I'm not confused," I snapped. "I know exactly what's happening." "I know you do, but Daniel doesn't, not yet. And until he sees the evidence with his own eyes, anything you say just sounds like paranoia." Harold pulled out his phone. "I got more footage yesterday. Want to see?" He showed me a video from 2 days ago, taken through the kitchen window. Vanessa was talking to someone on the phone, her back to the camera. "No, seriously, it's like having a giant toddler in the house," she was saying, her voice full of disgust. "He can't do anything for himself, and Daniel just expects me to drop everything and play nurse. I didn't sign up for this when I married him. His father was supposed to be living independently for years still. Nobody told me I'd be stuck changing adult diapers and listening to him babble about his pills all day. I wasn't in diapers. I could still use the bathroom on my own, could still manage most of my personal care, but the contempt in her voice made my stomach turn. "Who was she talking to?" I asked. "Her sister, from what I could gather." Harold put the phone away. "I've got about 15 different recordings now, all from the past month. It's more than enough." "Then why are we waiting?" The question came out more aggressive than I intended. "Why not just show Daniel now?" "Because we need to make it undeniable," Harold said patiently. "Right now she could explain away any single incident. 'Oh, I was just venting to my sister. Everyone does that. Oh, I didn't hear him calling for help. I had headphones in. Oh, the pills must have fallen behind the cleaning supplies accidentally.' But if we show him everything at once, if we build an undeniable pattern of behavior, he can't rationalize it away. We get one shot at this, Leonard. We need to make it count." I knew he was right, but patience had never been my strong suit, and the stroke had made it worse. I wanted justice now, wanted Vanessa exposed and humiliated the way she'd humiliated me. The obsession with revenge was becoming consuming, was the first thing I thought about when I woke up and the last thing before I slept. It probably wasn't healthy, but it was all I had. The next incident happened 3 days later. I'd been practicing walking without the cane, determined to regain some independence. The physical therapist who came twice a week had said I was making good progress, that with continued effort I might not need assistance devices within a few months. I was in the hallway, concentrating hard on putting one foot in front of the other, when dizziness hit suddenly. One of the lingering effects of the stroke was occasional vertigo, moments when the world tilted sideways without warning. I reached for the wall but missed, my depth perception still slightly off. I went down hard, my left side taking most of the impact. Pain radiated through my hip and shoulder, and for a terrifying moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't call out. I heard footsteps and managed to gasp, "Help," the word coming out barely above a whisper. Vanessa appeared at the end of the hallway. She looked at me lying on the floor, looked at the expression of pain and fear on my face, and then she laughed. Actually laughed, a short, harsh sound full of derision. "Oh please," she said, stepping over my legs like I was a piece of furniture. "Stop performing. You're fine. You're always fine. This is just another attention-seeking episode." I fell, I managed to say, my breathing still labored. "I'm hurt." "You fell because you refused to use your cane like the doctor told you to," she said, not even pausing. "That's not my problem. That's you being stubborn and difficult, as usual. When you're ready to stop playing victim, you can get up and walk to your room like an adult." She disappeared into the kitchen, and I heard the sound of the coffee maker starting up. She was making coffee while I lay on the floor in pain. The humiliation of it made tears prick at my eyes, and I hated that she could reduce me to this. That's when I saw Harold again, standing outside the hallway window. His expression was furious, angrier than I'd ever seen my mild-mannered friend, and his phone was up, recording everything. He disappeared, and a minute later, I heard the front doorbell. Vanessa's footsteps, annoyed at the interruption, the door opening. "Harold, this really isn't a good time." I was walking past and thought I heard someone call for help. Harold said loudly, his voice projecting. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Vanessa said, but there was an edge to her voice now. "Leonard's just being dramatic again. I'd like to check on him myself, if you don't mind." "Actually, I do mind. This is my house, and—" "It's Daniel's house," Harold said, his voice going steel. and Leonard is my friend. Now are you going to let me help him, or am I going to have to call Daniel and tell him his father is lying injured on the floor while you make coffee? There was a long pause, then Vanessa said, "Fine, help him, but I want you to know that he does this constantly. He throws himself on the floor for attention." Harold pushed past her, and within seconds he was kneeling beside me, his weathered hands gentle as he helped me sit up. "Where does it hurt?" "Hip," I said. "Left shoulder." "Did you hit your head?" "No, just lost my balance." He helped me to my feet slowly, carefully, supporting most of my weight. Vanessa stood in the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed, watching with an expression that was part annoyance, part calculation. She was figuring out how to spin this. I could see it in her eyes. "Thank you," I said to Harold when he'd gotten me settled on the edge of my bed. "Don't thank me yet," he said quietly. "But Leonard, it's almost time. I can't watch this anymore. I can't watch her treat you like this and do nothing. Tomorrow night, Daniel's supposed to be home for dinner, right?" "Yes, but..." "Tomorrow night we end this. I'm going to call Daniel, tell him I have something important to discuss about your care. We're going to show him everything, all of it, and he's going to have to face the truth about what his wife has been doing." Harold's jaw was set, determined. "I know you want to wait longer, gather more evidence, but I'm worried about what she might do next. What if the next time you fall, you hit your head? What if she decides hiding your pills once isn't enough?" This has escalated past the point where patience is the right strategy. Part of me wanted to argue, wanted to insist we stick to the original plan. But another part, the part that was tired and hurt and so angry I could barely see straight, wanted it over. Wanted Vanessa exposed, wanted my son to finally see what I'd been trying to tell him. "Tomorrow night," I agreed. That evening was the longest of my life. I couldn't eat, could barely focus on anything. My mind kept jumping ahead to the confrontation, imagining how it would go. I played out a dozen different scenarios, each one ending with Vanessa's face when she realized she'd been caught, with Daniel's shock and horror, with vindication and justice. But I also imagined it going wrong, imagined Daniel dismissing the evidence, imagined my son choosing his wife over his father. That fear sat in my chest like a stone. I also kept second-guessing myself. Was this right? Was I doing this for the right reasons, or had I let my anger and wounded pride turn me into something petty and vengeful? Before the stroke, I would have confronted this head-on, would have demanded a family meeting and addressed the issues directly. But the stroke had taken that option away, had made me weak and dependent, had forced me to resort to secret recordings and covert evidence gathering. Part of me felt ashamed of that, felt like I was being sneaky and underhanded in a way that didn't align with who I'd always tried to be. But then I'd remember Vanessa stepping over me while I lay on the floor. I'd remember her hiding my medication, her mocking laugh, her casual cruelty. And the shame would transform back into rage, into determination that she would face consequences for what she'd done. The next day dragged by with excruciating slowness. Vanessa was in an unusually good mood, humming to herself as she moved through the house. She'd barely spoken to me all day, which was almost worse than her usual barbs. It felt like she sensed something coming, like some predator instinct was warning her that the power dynamic was about to shift. Daniel came home at 6, right on time for once. "Dad," Harold called me, said he wanted to discuss your care plan. "That's good, right, that he's taking such an interest in helping you." "Yes," I managed, my heart pounding. "Harold's been a good friend. He should be here any minute." "Vanessa, can you set an extra place for dinner?" Vanessa's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, honey, whatever you need." When Harold arrived, he was carrying a laptop bag. We all sat in the living room, the space suddenly feeling too small, too close. Daniel sat in his usual chair, Vanessa perched on the arm of it, her hand on his shoulder in a picture of marital unity. I was on the couch, Harold beside me, his laptop balanced on his knees. "So what did you want to discuss?" Daniel asked, looking between us. "Dad's been doing okay with the physical therapy, hasn't he?" "Daniel," Harold said, his voice steady and calm, "I need you to watch something, and I need you to watch all of it before you say anything. Can you do that?" "Watch what?" Vanessa's voice had an edge to it now. Harold didn't answer her. He just opened the laptop, turned it toward Daniel, and pressed play. The first video appeared on screen. Vanessa's voice, clear as day. "We're not your nurses, Leonard." I watched my son's face as he stared at the screen, watched his expression shift from confusion to disbelief. The video showed me asking for my pills, showed Vanessa's mocking laughter, showed me gripping the counter for support while she scrolled through her phone with deliberate indifference. "Wait, Vanessa, what is this?" Daniel's voice was quiet, uncertain. "It's out of context," Vanessa said quickly, standing up. "This is ridiculous. Have you been spying on us, Harold? That's illegal. You can't just record people in their own home without permission. Actually, I can, Harold said calmly. Single-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows they're being recorded, it's perfectly legal. And I'm in every one of these videos, even if I'm just visible through a window. He clicked to the next video. Me on the hallway floor, Vanessa stepping over me, her voice cold and dismissive. Stop performing. Daniel's face had gone pale. Vanessa, tell me this isn't what it looks like. It's not, she said, but her voice was less certain now. He does exaggerate, Daniel. You know he does. He's always making everything seem worse than it is. There's more, Harold said quietly, clicking through. Video after video, a damning compilation of cruelty. Vanessa hiding my pills behind cleaning supplies. Vanessa on the phone with her sister, calling me a burden. Vanessa slamming the door when I called for help, the sound of my voice pleading in the background. Jesus Christ, Daniel whispered. His hands were shaking as he reached for the laptop, pausing one of the videos. How long has this been going on? 6 weeks that I've documented, Harold said, but based on what Leonard's told me, probably since shortly after he moved in. Daniel turned to look at me, and I saw guilt and horror warring on his face. Dad, why did you tell me? I tried, I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted. You didn't believe me. You thought the stroke had made me confused, paranoid. She made sure you thought that. That's not fair, Vanessa interjected, her voice rising. I've done nothing but try to help. I've given up my entire life to take care of him, and this is the thanks I get. Secret recordings and accusations. You hid his medication, Daniel said, his voice hardening. I heard you, I watched you do it. I didn't hide anything. It must have fallen behind the cleaning supplies by accident. Don't, Daniel said sharply. Don't lie to me, not now, not when I'm watching you do it on video. Vanessa's composure was cracking now, her perfect facade showing fissures. You're going to believe him over me, your wife. I've been nothing but supportive through this whole nightmare, and the first time someone shows you edited videos, you turn on me. They're not edited, Harold said firmly. I have the full, uncut versions, time-stamped and dated, hours of footage showing a pattern of neglect and emotional abuse. Abuse? Vanessa's laugh was sharp, brittle. That's ridiculous. You can't abuse someone by not wanting to be their personal servant. I have a life too, or I did before all of this. You stepped over him while he was on the floor, Daniel said, his voice shaking now. He was hurt, calling for help, and you stepped over him and made coffee. He wasn't really hurt. He does this all the time, Daniel. He throws himself down and plays victim to get attention. You're not here during the day. You don't see what I have to deal with. I see it now, Daniel said quietly. He stood up, walked to the window, his back to all of us. I see it very clearly. There was a long silence. I watched Vanessa's face cycle through emotions, anger, fear, calculation, desperation. She was trying to figure out how to salvage this, how to manipulate the situation back to her advantage. But there was no coming back from this. The evidence was too clear, too damning. Daniel, honey, she started, her voice softer now, pleading. I know how this looks, but you have to understand the pressure I've been under. Having your father here, it's been so hard. I didn't sign up for this. We were supposed to have our lives together, just us, and then suddenly I'm expected to be a full-time caregiver to someone who resents me. I don't resent you, I said, finding my voice. I resent how you've treated me. There's a difference. See, even now he's trying to make me the villain. Vanessa turned to Daniel, tears streaming down her face now. Real tears, or at least better manufactured ones. I've tried so hard. You know I have, but he's impossible to please, impossible to help. Nothing I do is ever good enough. You hid his medication, Daniel repeated, and there was a finality in his voice that made Vanessa freeze. You put his life at risk. The doctors said missing doses could trigger another stroke, and you deliberately hid his pills where he couldn't find them. How do you explain that? I told you it was an accident. It wasn't an accident. Daniel's voice rose for the first time, sharp and angry. I watched you put them there. I heard you laugh at him when he asked for help. I saw you step over him on the floor. Don't tell me what I didn't see. Vanessa's face hardened. The tears stopped as quickly as they'd started, her expression going cold and calculated. Fine, you want the truth. Yes, I put his pills behind the cleaning supplies. Yes, I didn't rush to help every single time he whined for attention. Because I am not a nurse, Daniel. I am your wife. I married you, not your father. And I am not going to spend the next however many years of my life being blamed for every little thing that goes wrong in that man's recovery. Little thing, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. You could have killed me. Missing my medication isn't a little thing. Oh please, you're fine. You're always fine. This whole helpless, invalid act is exactly that, an act. You could do more for yourself if you actually tried instead of milking your stroke for all the sympathy you can get. Get out, Daniel said quietly. Vanessa blinked. What? Get out of my house, now. You can't be serious. Daniel, this is our home. You're going to kick me out over some manipulated videos and your father's lies. They're not lies. Daniel's composure finally broke, his voice loud and raw. I watched you, I heard you, and suddenly everything makes sense. All the times Dad tried to tell me something was wrong, all the times he seemed scared or upset when I came home, and you'd explain it away as confusion from the stroke. You made me doubt my own father, made me think he was losing his mind, when all along you were the one tormenting him. Tormenting? Vanessa's voice dripped with sarcasm. That's dramatic even for you. You stepped over him when he was hurt on the floor. Daniel was shouting now, months of tension and denial erupting. What the hell is wrong with you? What kind of person does that? The kind of person who's tired of being taken advantage of, Vanessa shouted back. I didn't ask for any of this. Your father was supposed to be independent for years. We were supposed to travel, to enjoy our lives, and instead I'm stuck in this house playing nursemaid to someone who hates me. I don't hate you, I said again, but my voice was lost in their argument. You know what I think, Vanessa continued, her voice venomous now. I think this whole thing was a setup. I think you and Harold planned this, cooked up these videos to make me look bad so you could get rid of me and keep your daddy's boy all to yourself. That's insane, Daniel said flatly. Is it, or is it insane that your neighbor just happens to have hours of perfectly timed footage of me at my worst moments? That's not suspicious to you. The only thing suspicious is your behavior, Harold interjected, his voice still calm but cold. And for the record, I started recording because I noticed Leonard had bruises he couldn't explain, because he flinched when you came into the room, because I've seen cases of elder abuse before and recognized the signs. This isn't a conspiracy. This is documentation of a pattern of neglect and cruelty. Elder abuse, Vanessa repeated mockingly. You people are unbelievable. I refuse to be demonized for having normal human reactions to an impossible situation. Sue me for not being Mother Teresa. I'm not asking you to be Mother Teresa, Daniel said, his voice dropping back to that quiet, dangerous tone. I'm asking you to have basic human decency. I'm asking you to not harm someone who's vulnerable and dependent on you for care, and you couldn't even manage that. Fine, Vanessa grabbed her purse from the side table, her movements sharp and aggressive. Fine, you want me gone, I'm gone, but don't come crying to me when you realize what you're giving up. Don't call me when you're drowning in medical bills and caretaker fatigue, and you remember that I was the only one willing to help. You weren't helping, I said, finding my voice one more time. You were making everything worse. She turned on me, her eyes blazing. You know what, Leonard, I hope you're happy. I hope destroying my marriage was worth it. I hope you enjoy having your son all to yourself again, because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? You couldn't stand that Daniel had a life that didn't revolve around you. That's enough, Daniel said sharply. Leave, now. Vanessa looked at him one more time, and I saw the moment she realized she'd lost. Whatever calculation she was running in her head, whatever last-ditch manipulation she was considering, she abandoned it. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked out with as much dignity as she could muster. The door slammed behind her, and the silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the closed door. Then he turned to me and I saw tears streaming down his face. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have seen what was happening. You didn't know, I said, though the words felt hollow. Part of me was angry that it had taken video evidence for him to believe me, that my word alone hadn't been enough, but another part understood. Vanessa had been clever, had played her role perfectly when Daniel was around, had systematically undermined my credibility until anything I said could be dismissed as confusion or paranoia. I should have known, Daniel insisted, sinking back into his chair. You're my father, I should have trusted you. She was very convincing, Harold said gently. That's what makes this type of abuse so insidious. The abuser presents one face to the outside world and another to the victim. You can't blame yourself for being manipulated, Daniel. I can and I do, Daniel said. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. How do I make this right? How do I fix this? You already did, I said, though I wasn't sure if that was true. The damage Vanessa had done, the fear and humiliation and helplessness I'd felt these past months, that wasn't going to disappear just because she'd been exposed. But it was a start. The weeks that followed were strange and disorienting. Vanessa moved out completely within 3 days, taking her belongings and leaving divorce papers on the kitchen counter. Daniel didn't fight it, didn't even seem surprised. The house felt different without her in it, lighter somehow. but also emptier. Daniel took time off work to help me find a rehabilitation apartment, a place designed for stroke survivors that offered support services without being a full nursing home. It had grab bars and accessible features, physical therapists on site, but also independence and privacy. It was exactly what I needed. "Are you sure about this?" I asked him the day we looked at the apartment. "I don't want you to feel like you have to get rid of me." "Dad, no," Daniel said firmly. "This isn't about getting rid of you. This is about giving you what you need to recover properly. And honestly, after everything that happened, I think we both need some space." He was right, though it hurt to admit it. Our relationship had been damaged by what Vanessa had done, by his initial refusal to believe me, by my own anger and resentment at having to depend on people who didn't want me there. We needed time to heal that separately before we could fully repair it together. But moving into the rehab apartment also meant facing the consequences of my own actions and attitudes throughout this ordeal. The apartment coordinator, a kind woman named Patricia, asked me during the intake interview about my support system. "I have my son," I said, "and my friend Harold." "That's good, and how would you describe your emotional state? Many stroke survivors struggle with depression, anxiety, or anger." I hesitated. "I've been angry," I admitted, "very angry for a long time." "At your situation, at the stroke itself?" "At my daughter-in-law mostly, at how she treated me." I paused. "But also at myself, I think, for being dependent, for not being able to do things I used to do easily, for having to ask for help." Patricia nodded like she'd heard this 1,000 times before. "That's very common. The stroke took away your independence, which for many people feels like it took away their identity. And then when the people around you didn't respond with the support you needed, that compounded the trauma." "I became obsessed with it," I said quietly, "with getting revenge, with proving she was wrong about me. It's all I could think about for weeks." "And now that you've gotten that revenge, that justice, how do you feel?" It was a good question. I'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, satisfied, and I did feel those things to an extent. Vanessa had been exposed, had faced consequences, had been forced out of the life she'd been so comfortable in. But I also felt hollow, exhausted, like I'd spent so much energy on anger that I didn't have anything left for actual recovery. "Tired," I said honestly, "really tired." "That's normal too," Patricia said gently. "You've been through a major medical event and a traumatic living situation. It's going to take time to process all of that and move forward, but you're in the right place now. We'll help you get there." She was right. In the months that followed, as I worked with physical therapists and occupational therapists and slowly regained more function and independence, I found myself thinking less about Vanessa and more about my own recovery. The apartment had a community of other stroke survivors, people who understood what I was going through in ways that my family couldn't. We shared strategies, frustrations, small victories. It was healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Harold visited regularly, usually bringing coffee and pastries from the bakery near his house. One afternoon, about 3 months after I'd moved in, we were sitting on the small balcony outside my apartment when he said something that caught me off guard. "I need to tell you something about those recordings," he said. My stomach tightened. "What about them?" "I didn't start recording because I suspected Vanessa," Harold admitted, his eyes on the parking lot below us. "I mean, I did suspect something was wrong, but that's not why I had my phone out that first time." "I don't understand." Harold pulled out a worn notebook from his jacket pocket, the kind reporters used to carry. "I've been working on a project, documenting elder abuse in our neighborhood, in the community. There have been several cases in the past year, people living with family members who were supposed to be caring for them but were actually neglecting or mistreating them. I was gathering evidence, trying to build a comprehensive report to submit to local authorities and maybe get some protective services reformed." I stared at him, so I was part of a project, an investigation. "No," Harold said quickly, "not like that. When I saw what was happening to you when I started recording, that was personal. You're my friend. I would have documented it regardless of any larger project. But Leonard, you weren't the only one. Vanessa's not the only person doing this." He opened the notebook, showed me pages of notes. Names I didn't recognize, addresses in our neighborhood and the surrounding area, brief descriptions of incidents observed, suspicions noted. It was extensive, thorough, the work of someone who'd been paying attention for a long time. "How many?" I asked. "Cases I'm certain about, 6 including yours. Cases I suspect but haven't confirmed, at least a dozen more." Harold's jaw tightened. "It's everywhere, Leonard. Adult children or their spouses taking in agging parents and then resenting them, mistreating them. Seeing them as burdens rather than people. And because it happens behind closed doors, because the victims are often too ashamed or afraid to speak up, it just continues. What are you going to do with this? I'm going to expose all of it, Harold said firmly. I've been working with a journalist friend at the local paper, and we're going to run a series on elder abuse in suburban communities. Your case, with your permission, will be the centerpiece. Not because it was the worst, though it was bad enough, but because we have such clear documentation. Video evidence, medical records showing missed medications and increased health problems during the period of abuse. Everything we'd need to make the story undeniable. I should have felt violated, should have been angry that my personal trauma was going to be part of some exposé, but instead I felt something else. Purpose, maybe. The idea that what I'd gone through could prevent someone else from experiencing the same thing, that Vanessa's cruelty could lead to systemic change rather than just personal justice. Yes, I said, use it, use all of it. You're sure it's going to be public, people will know what happened to you? I'm sure, and I was. The shame I'd felt about needing help, about being dependent, about being victimized, I was done carrying that. If sharing my story could help someone else, could shine a light on this problem that hid in plain sight, then it was worth it. The article ran 6 weeks later, spread across 3 parts in the Sunday paper. Harold had been true to his word. My case was featured prominently, but it was framed as part of a larger pattern, a systemic problem that affected thousands of elderly people living with family members who saw them as obligations rather than loved ones. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Letters poured into the paper, people sharing their own stories or expressing shock at what was happening in their own communities. Local authorities announced they were reviewing protocols for elder care and abuse prevention. The story was picked up by national outlets, and suddenly Harold and I were being interviewed on local news programs, advocating for better protections and support services. Vanessa tried to sue, claiming defamation and invasion of privacy. It went nowhere. The evidence was too clear, the documentation too thorough, and she'd signed off on being filmed when she'd moved into what was legally Daniel's house. Her lawyer apparently advised her to drop it and move on, which she eventually did. But the most unexpected consequence came about 8 months after the initial article ran. I got a call from Daniel, his voice excited in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Dad, you need to see this," he said. "Get Harold and meet me at my house. Now." When we arrived, Daniel showed us his laptop. On the screen was an email chain from a man named Robert Chen. Wait, no, that name feels wrong. Let me start over. On the screen was an email chain from a man named Robert Williams who lived 2 streets over. He'd read the article, recognized some of the patterns Harold had described, and started documenting his own father's care situation. His sister-in-law had been systematically isolating their father, controlling his medication, convincing the family he was becoming senile when really he was being deliberately confused and undermined. "He wants to know if Harold can help him gather evidence," Daniel said. "He wants to do what we did." Harold looked at the email, then at me. "This is just the beginning," he said quietly. "Once people know what to look for, once they understand it's not just them, that this is a pattern." He was right. Over the next year, Harold became something of a reluctant expert on elder abuse documentation and advocacy. He helped 3 more families in our area gather evidence and confront abusive situations. 2 led to criminal charges. All led to the elderly parents being moved to safer situations. As for me, I continued my recovery. My speech improved dramatically with continued therapy. My left side regained most of its function, though I still tired easily and probably always would. I never fully regained the independence I'd had before the stroke, but I learned to accept help without shame, to recognize the difference between dependence and interdependence. Daniel and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, through regular dinners and honest conversations about what had happened. He apologized more times than I could count for not believing me, for letting Vanessa's manipulation cloud his judgment. I apologized too, for my own pride and stubbornness, for the ways my anger and obsession with revenge had sometimes blinded me to the people who were actually trying to help. The divorce was finalized within a year. I never saw Vanessa again, though I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to another state, remarried quickly. I wondered sometimes if her new husband had elderly parents, if history would repeat itself. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd done what I could by exposing her behavior and contributing to larger systemic changes. What I didn't expect was how the experience would change me fundamentally. The stroke had forced me to confront my own mortality and vulnerability in ways I never had before. The abuse had shown me how easily people could be cruel to those who depended on them. But the aftermath, the slow process of recovery and advocacy, taught me something more important, that asking for help wasn't weakness, that dependence wasn't shameful, and that sometimes the most courageous thing you could do was admit you needed support. I still think about those months sometimes, still feel echoes of the anger and humiliation. But I also think about the families Harold helped after reading our story, about the policy changes that came from the exposé, about the support groups that formed for caregivers to prevent burnout and resentment from building. Vanessa's cruelty had consequences that reached far beyond her own life, beyond my own suffering, and somehow that made it mean something. 2 years after the stroke, I stood at a podium in the community center, addressing a room full of caregivers and families dealing with elderly care situations. My speech was slow but clear, my left hand steady enough to hold my notes. Harold sat in the front row, and Daniel was there too, pride evident on his face. "I'm not going to tell you this is easy," I said to the assembled crowd. "Caring for someone who's had a stroke, who's lost their independence, it's incredibly difficult, frustrating, exhausting. But there's a difference between struggling with the burden and taking that struggle out on the person you're caring for. There's a difference between needing support and becoming abusive. And if you find yourself crossing that line, if you find yourself resenting the person rather than the situation, it's time to ask for help. It's time to make changes. Because the alternative, letting that resentment build until it becomes cruelty, that doesn't just hurt the person you're caring for, it damages everyone involved." After the speech, people came up to thank me, to share their own stories, to ask for advice. An elderly woman grabbed my good hand with both of hers, tears in her eyes. "My daughter has been so angry with me," she whispered. "I thought it was my fault, thought I was being too demanding. But listening to you, I realize it's not me, it's the situation. We need help." "Then ask for it," I said gently. "Don't wait until it gets worse. Ask now." She nodded, still crying, and her daughter appeared behind her, looking exhausted and guilty, and relieved all at once. They left together, talking quietly, and I hoped they'd find the support they needed before resentment turned into something darker. Harold found me afterward, as the crowd was dispersing. "You did good today," he said. "We did good," I corrected. "None of this happens without you, without the evidence you gathered, without your persistence." "Maybe," Harold acknowledged, "but you're the one living it, making something meaningful from what happened. That takes courage, Leonard." I thought about that word, courage. I'd never felt particularly courageous through any of this. Angry, yes. Determined, absolutely. Obsessed with revenge for a while, certainly. But courageous felt like too grand a word for simply surviving and trying to prevent others from suffering the same way. But maybe that was courage too. Maybe courage wasn't fearlessness or grand gestures. Maybe it was just the decision to keep going, to turn trauma into advocacy, to let your worst experiences become lessons that might help someone else. That night, alone in my apartment, I pulled out the journal I'd kept during those dark months with Vanessa. I'd thought about throwing it away many times, about purging the memories and moving forward clean. But instead, I'd kept it, had even added to it over the past 2 years. Not just documenting abuse anymore, but documenting recovery, progress, small victories and setbacks. I turned to a blank page and wrote, "Today I spoke to 50 people about my experience. Several approached me afterward with their own stories. I think we helped each other. This is what justice looks like, I think. Not just revenge, not just consequences for one person, but systemic change." Harold was right, my story was just the first. There are so many others, still hidden, still suffering, but one by one we're bringing them into the light. I paused, then added one more line. "Vanessa taught me about cruelty, but Harold, Daniel, Patricia, and all the others taught me about resilience. I know which lesson I'd rather carry forward." I closed the journal and looked around my small apartment, at the life I'd rebuilt from the wreckage of the stroke and everything that followed. It wasn't the life I'd planned, wasn't the future I'd imagined during those years as a successful engineer with full health and independence. But it was mine, earned through struggle and persistence, and the willingness to accept help when I needed it. And that, I realized, was enough, more than enough. It was everything.